We're seeing a lot of people who are talking about voting as being important, and voting most definitely is very important, but it's not just voting, but how you vote and the strategy behind your vote. So I hear a lot of people say, "Oh man, I ain't really gonna vote because voting doesn't matter." And then you hear a lot of people saying, "Well, you have to vote, and you have to vote for Joe Biden, or you have to vote for this person, or you're a traitor to your people." The reality is, in the voting conversation, we don't understand ourselves, and we don't understand our enemy, and we don't understand exactly the context that we're in to make voting the important and powerful thing that we want it to be. So I love this quote. If you know your enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, you will fear for every victory gained, you will suffer a defeat. And I know that's a feeling that I've had in my past and still continue to have, and a lot of people have. If you know neither your enemy nor yourself, then you will succumb.
John, we don't see we
Oh,
see like your land, we see your screen. We don't see
uh-huh.
the quote.
Oh,
We
okay.
see like
Sorry.
lawsuits.
Oops. Um, put it on the wrong screen. Sorry. All right. All right. Is it good now? You see what I'm?
Yep, we're
Okay.
good.
Yeah. So another quote I love is the oppressed having internalized the image of the oppressor have adopted his guidelines and are fearful of freedom. And I feel like right now, election time, you feel a lot of fear in people. You fear people who don't understand what's going on, what possibly could happen under a Trump administration, a Biden administration, and just a lot of negativity and shaming and blaming instead of understanding around the process of voting. So cultural trauma, our people have been hurt. Our people have been trained to hold their pain in their bodies. Our people have been trained that resistance is more dangerous than the systems that have harmed them. And our people have been conditioned to believe that their oppression is their fault and the conditions around them are created by their powerlessness. You hear this a lot in voting. Well, we don't vote, so that's why we got what we got. We don't get out there and do what we got to do and vote. But then everybody knows the reality is just voting alone actually doesn't change a lot. It adds possibilities, it changes probabilities, but it doesn't entirely change what's happening. And so because of this cultural trauma, when a process like voting is introduced, people respond, fight, flight, freeze. Some people don't do anything. Some people go all the way in and run at it. Some people run away from it, but it becomes incredibly charged because of this trauma and because of this idea that some people have that if we don't vote, then we did nothing, and that is exactly why our oppression exists. And some people that voting doesn't mean anything. The truth is far much more in the middle, and really is about our strategy. Relationships move at the speed of trust, but social change moves at the speed of relationships. So while we want to vote for individual people who create more opportunity for prosperity, for all the things that we want, the reality is it's not just about voting, but it's about our relationship to the people we elect. It's about our relationship to government. So again, everybody needs to get out there and vote. Everybody needs to participate in the process, because in that participation, you begin to learn and understand. But we also have to hold our relationship with those that we vote for, continue to not just hold them accountable, but actually understand them, how they move, who they are, why they do what they do. And that is when we'll actually be able to move with speed. And that's what you saw in moments like the civil rights movement and the lead up into the New Deal. So there's some pictures of the voting rights fight. History is often written by the victors, and it's also rewritten by the victors when they lose. And that's another part that I think not enough people talk about. So the civil rights movement was a powerful time in human history. People across the world, not just in the United States, were fighting a global revolution, resisting oppression from Africa, South America, Europe, Russia, and all throughout the country in different ways. But the reality is that movement was an intersectional movement. It was not just about voting. And although many people frame it as voting and revolution, there's so many things in between it. This picture of Malcolm X giving the Ballad of the Bullet speech, which was really designed to say, look, I agree with the bullet. I agree with getting into physical confrontation when necessary, not in violence but in self-defense. But the reality is, if you don't want to go get that ballot, then go get it. But you got to make a choice, right? There's no neutrality when it comes to oppression. On the other side, you have John Lewis, walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, again with thousands of people who are fighting for their voting rights. And these are the images that we associate with voting, and these are the images that are often used to guilt us into voting, to say that these people died for our right to vote, therefore it is disrespectful to their legacy not to vote. And I would argue that in some ways it is, but also that those folks were not just fighting for a vote. The vote was the means to an end. And it's great to see the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act signed, but we exist in the legacy of those pieces of legislation, and in our oppression has really been centered around distancing us from the real reasons that people were fighting for voting rights. So voting rights were seen as a strategy for civil rights. The civil rights movement was a combination of struggles for economic rights, for housing rights, for the right to exist as a human being without being hurt. And voting was seen as the pathway through that because it decided political leadership. It decided who was on juries. It decided the policy and legislation. It decided who ran the executive branch, who was able to control spending and implementation, who had government jobs and appointments, which often are as important, if not more important, than who was in the legislative branch, the judges and the legal interpretation for things like the use of force, what is a lynching, who appeals and challenges existing laws. And the legislative branch, the introduction of new legislation and certain approvals of old legislation. So while voting rights tends to be the story of the civil rights movement, the reality is, for all of these reasons, all of the people who were interacting with the civil rights movement, really many of them were able to come together and say, we're going to focus on voting rights, because if we don't control the way that the political machines work, then we're not going to be able to get these economic rights, to get these housing rights, and to really create a society, a beloved community that Martin Luther King communicated about. And the reality is, there was very little unity at the beginning of the civil rights movement. And as different issues began to raise and come to prominence, more and more folks started to come to this conclusion: we really need to go after voting rights, because if we don't have the right to vote, there's no chance that we'll ever have of getting these other rights. Voting right now is not what it used to be, partially because there have been many tactics over the course of years to invalidate our vote, to change our relationship to the voting process and to political power. So this is how history works. We fight, we say, we want full rights, and we want to end what really is apartheid. Let's be real, let's be honest. The American story is a story of segregation, to say that it was segregated, but the reality is it was no different than what was happening in South Africa. Many might even argue that it was more brutal and more sustainable than what was going on in South Africa. So as the voting rights fight ended, the people who run this country, Democrat, Republican, left, right, the people who want to control and make profit from all of us, created a lot of tactics that would say, hey, y'all want this vote? Here you go. Here's the vote. Now we're going to start gerrymandering. We're going to start rewriting these districts to cut Black power, or to isolate Black power, so that even if you have one Black elected official, they do not have the ability, without cutting a whole lot of deals, to actually move legislation. They continued voter suppression, but voter suppression wasn't, we're going to whoop your ass when you come to the polls. Voter suppression was adding complexity, right? And before it was poll taxes, now many of our Black immigrant brothers and sisters have to take tests that no American outside of college, graduates and students would be able to understand in order to get access to voting. There's voter suppression through, frankly, just eliminating votes. I remember working on Betty Jean Grant's campaign a couple years ago, and a bunch of lawyers were able to discredit all of the votes that came out of one of the polling stations, and she ended up losing by destroyed them. Once the Black Panthers started to run, and honestly, they still are a few folks who were in the Black Panthers who are in Congress and who take office. But COINTELPRO eliminated so many brothers and sisters who might have been able to take on political power and really intimidated folks and saying, you know what, that Black radicalism stuff, let's go to the ballot, right? We don't want to deal with the bullet because they got more bullets. Buying Black leadership, many Black churches, many Black community organizations are heavily supported because of their ability to produce votes and to produce what we call double prime voters. So prime voters are the voters who voted in the last election. We have double, triple prime voters, but basically voting, like anything else, is something that people tend to do very consistently. And so our elected officials focus on those of us who vote very consistently and their opinions. Gentrification has a huge impact on voting. So these lines are drawn based on racial lines and racial concentrations. As you start to pull more and more Black people out of cities and put them in the suburban or other neighborhoods, it disempowers them because there was a little bit of power in the fact that folks were segregated in the same place and could organize their interests around folks. Again, segregation is if there wasn't for segregation, gerrymandering wouldn't be effective. If there wasn't a foundation that isolated people in certain places, it wouldn't allow them to draw these lines that make sure that the same candidates who are not doing anything win. Deindustrialization, which is just a big word for jobs leaving. In the 70s and 80s, it used to be a lot easier to go out here to a factory, to a place that didn't require you to have a college degree or high level education and make a living. So as these elected officials who have benefited from this system, continue to make decisions that don't benefit us, it actually disempowers us from taking power away from them because our folks do not work. They don't have jobs, and it's very, very hard. We all know the CIA is the crack implementation agency. They spent, and there's well documented. I got plenty of books if anybody, has any issues with those statements, but they implemented drugs based on this segregation. It's different drugs in different neighborhoods, which then fuel mass incarceration. So again, a lot of these things are all set up and strategically used to take away our power. The divestment from Black and brown neighborhoods. So as Black and brown neighborhoods are divested from, as drugs come into them, as mass incarceration comes into them, that creates that cultural trauma and that blame game where, again, as people, we make our individual decisions, but the urban planning and the political planning and the context that created what we have to decide around, was driven by policy and was driven to give us the message. It don't matter if you vote. It doesn't matter if you vote. Don't matter who your leadership is. Like, this is what you get. And obviously, you're seeing with the Trump administration immigration policy, having a huge impact on who's able to come here, what kind of political ideas they have, and their ability to vote and participate in the process. If you've ever worked with immigrant communities around voting, it is incredibly easy for folks to be disenfranchised, and even as part of mass incarceration. While there are about 2.5 million people in prison right now, there are even more people who have been in prison and come out of incarceration thinking that they were not able to vote, being consistently told that not only were they not able to, but they didn't deserve to, because part of their debt to society, part of their payment for whatever crime they committed, is not being able to be part of the political process. And we all know that consistently happens in segregated neighborhoods, in gentrified neighborhoods, and along these lines that make it difficult and a complex thing to do to vote. Voting is really important because it impacts political behavior, right? So when we vote a lot, when we vote in blocks, when we name that we are voting together for a particular reason, it has an impact on political behavior. Politicians need votes. They need volunteers. They need advertising and promotion. They need support staff. They need support from political parties and political endorsements. And they're influenced by who's voting for them. So if there's a block of people in your neighborhood that all want PlayStations for everybody, if every single double prime voter says, I am voting because I want PlayStations for everybody, you best believe that elected official in that region is going to be like, man, how am I going to figure out how to get PlayStations for everybody? Because if somebody else figures that out, they're going to be able to take my spot. And so, not all voters are seen as the same. Potential voters are seen very differently as prime voters, double prime voters, triple prime voters. And that's why these institutions, these community institutions that produce elders that have voted in the last, however many elections are so important, because their opinions, their thoughts, and the way that they understand how the world works becomes what these politicians focus on. And even if they take corporate money, they know that they have to bring that corporate money back to the community in some way, some type of, see them giving out turkeys. We see them, cutting ribbons on affordable housing projects. But that's the gamesmanship. They don't all just run with big corporations, because they know that if they can't use the resources they get from big corporations to benefit at least a couple people in the community that are actually going to vote, then they're going to lose their elections. They're also looking at policies that produce revenue. Every time we demand for affordable housing, every time we demand for better policing, those things cost money, and there's the government is a business. So they're looking for people who have ideas that can help them produce more revenue. And I say all this to say that, again, it's important for us to vote as individuals, but it's even more important for us to vote together behind some type of political platform, behind some type of narrative that says we're voting for you to get this. And if we don't get that, not only are we as individuals not going to vote, but we're going to organize other people not to vote for you. So voting today is controlled by political parties at the national level. It's driven by big money in the electoral college. And that makes it really difficult, because we don't have really good options because of the amount of money in politics. Political deals make primaries a deciding factor in most elections. So here's an example. The Erie County Democrats and Erie County Republicans have basically cut a deal. Democrats don't run in the suburbs. Republicans don't run in the city, which means that if you win a Democratic primary, most likely you're going to win the election, because no one will oppose you unless they oppose you from one of the minor parties. And so that means that there's less political competition. There's less energy put into creating new ideas and new ways for people to be able to build political power, because everybody knows, the Democrats pretty much got it on lock in the city, and Republicans have it on lock, in the suburbs and rural communities. There's been strategic disengagement. The Board of Elections and the people who run the Board of Elections are all appointed and come through the existing party. And while there are a lot of voter engagement practices, we wouldn't need those practices if there was automatic registration, if voting and all of these other things were just ubiquitous. It was universal. You didn't have to be engaged to vote, but it was automatic that you got a ballot in the mail that said, this is your opportunity to vote, send it back in. And there are many countries that have those types of engagement where the engagement is not necessary. They don't have to engage you about taxes. They don't have to engage you about the things that they take from you, because they just do it in a universal way. Incumbency makes this even harder, because winners win. So once you win an election and you've shown you can win an election, more people are willing to support you and invest in you, because you've shown you can get something done. But that also means that builds a power that says you have to do less and less to continue to earn the value of the votes. The 501c3 C4 tax code has allowed for major corporations and major special interest groups to raise enormous amounts of money to buy our elections. And we have a lot of organizations now that are community-based C4s, but since the code has started, most of the C4 organizations that are raising money and being paid, putting people out in the streets that are paid to talk to you about voting, come from a specific interest. And it's not necessarily bad. I have definitely worked for organizations that did that. And there's definitely people out there who are doing good work under the 501c4 tax code. But the reality is it allows for any corporation or any individual with no accountability or knowledge from the community or for the world at large to invest billions of dollars into elections. And that's what money as a form of political speech means. agreed to racialized turf. Local elections are driven by a local corporate agenda. So because revenue is so important, corporations create jobs, and they make people able to pay taxes and able to have disposable income, which drives sales and property taxes. There's always a priority for the local corporate people who are bringing business into the community over the community, and this idea of trickle down economics, that if we rock with the corporate elite and their money, it's going to trickle down to our people. What that usually means is that local, political clubs and organizations are then able to get people jobs within those corporations, get people government jobs, and those government jobs are then triggered during election time to say, yeah, well, I got you this job, and now we're going to, we're going to ask you to come walk for us, come walk for this candidate, come walk for that candidate, to make sure that our team stays elected, even if our team isn't necessarily benefiting the folks that look like them. So political patronage systems are real old. They go back to feudal lords, hooking up their families to make sure that political power stayed within their interests. So here, I'm talking about gerrymandering. Here are some pictures of some election districts. So the one on the left is 149, which was Sean Ryan's district. There is going to be an election, but John Rivera won the primary and against Adam Bojack and Roberto Quintana. But if you look at this district, you have the west side of Buffalo, Elmwood and Black Rock, Riverside area. But then he also governs Blaisdell, Hamburg. I never heard of Wanaka, Pinehurst, and Lakeview. But you see, one person is being asked to govern the interests of the west side of Buffalo, a little bit of South Buffalo, and then also balance those interests with Hamburg, Orchard Park, and these other richer communities. So if you are the person who's elected to represent this district, what type of decisions are you going to make? Are you going to make the decisions that benefit the west side of Buffalo and the poor people of color that live over here? Or are you going to start to make decisions that benefit the people of Hamburg because they can give you money and they can help you generate revenue? The other one is Crystal People Stokes District. So you see, it's almost entirely like the east side of Buffalo, and respect to the folks who are doing these jobs. But the way that the districts are set up mean that most of the Black political power in Buffalo, at least as it results in the state, is concentrated on one district and on one woman, Crystal People Stokes. And it means that other people who are governing the surrounding districts don't have to care about Black issues and about what's going on the east side of Buffalo and about the history of segregation. They actually get to benefit from it because we often gerrymandering isolates the way that our political voice gets heard. These are pictures here. I'm going to ask the audience right now, what do you think these are pictures of? What do these maps represent?
One on the left, Common Council.
Yep. You want to guess what the one on the right is?
Looks like the one on the right says the Homeowners Loan Corporation Residential Security Map. I don't know what all those words mean together.
So that's a redlining map.
I'll say that in the comments it said red line.
Yep. So this is a redlining map. The yellow areas were basically areas where there was not going to be guaranteed lending, which means that a mortgage is kind of a dumb idea for a bank to pay upfront for a home and then expect payment over 30 years. The only reason banks do mortgages is because the federal government guarantees that the money will be paid to them if they can't pay. And that's what foreclosure is. The process of transferring that mortgage from the bank's debt to the government's debt and paying that government loan back. So that's why, they tell us about homeownership, because with homeownership, banks win no matter what. You don't pay your mortgage, they get the value of your mortgage and to keep your house. So this is in 1937, one of the first maps that was made for the FHA to decide where they were going to insure and then what the cost of the insurance of loans were. And if you look at it, you look at the west side, Black Rock, you look at the east side of Buffalo, it's all yellow, right? And that tells you that those areas were areas where banks were not going to give out mortgages. Therefore, people were not going to be able to own their homes, right? And that meant that they would be forced to be renters, and politically, they would not control their destiny. Now, if you look at this map of the Common Council, you can see that the east side of Buffalo has been chopped up into multiple districts. And I want you to kind of focus. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but on this area here where you see the University District, the Fillmore District, and the Lovejoy District kind of connect. And it's in an area around Bailey Avenue where there's a high concentration of Black folks, but you can cross 2 or 3 streets over and there's 4 different people who represent those neighborhoods. And what that does is it separates the Black political power that region could have, and it focuses on 4 different people instead of 1 person. And so you can see how a lot of these maps are designed again to make our votes, less valuable. This is a map of Black census data where Black people live. And again, if you look at all these maps, and I'm probably going a little bit over time here, so I'm going to kind of speed it up. But if you look at all these maps, you can see how banks and the political worlds, draw us into situations where we are concentrated. And then whenever we are concentrated in an area because of economics, political people will come and chop us up politically so that our voices are not able to be heard as much. So I want to pause because I was talking for a while and just kind of open it up. But I want to say it's incredibly important to vote, but also we have to start to learn what is the meaning of our vote, what is our relationship to voting, and how are we using voting as a strategy to get what we actually want, and not just saying, hey man, if you don't get up out there and vote, there's something wrong with you, because to me that reflects that original quote with the art of war. We're not understanding our enemy, we're not understanding ourselves, and therefore we're continuing to succumb to these battles. So I'm gonna stop there and get some questions, reactions, and see where we're at with time.
Fred Hampton, everybody. Fred Hampton. So as it is a 2 political party, can you tell us how some of the other party lines are trying to survive, like the working family parties, and why it's important that even though they're still voting for Democrats, why it's important to vote on their line?
Absolutely, that's a perfect segue. There's many parties: Conservative Party, Green Party, Libertarian Party, and the Working Families Party is a fusion party. So basically, you can vote for a Democrat, but work for it on the Voting Families Party line. What that does is exactly what I was talking about, the Working Families Party agenda. And when I'm finished talking, I'll find the link to drop to their agenda in. Is basically a platform that was designed by a lot of activists in the late 80s, and has continued to evolve now under the leadership of Mo Mitchell, who is a powerful Black Lives Matter activist, to really advance the needs of working families. So you can check their platform out on the website. Right now, Governor Cuomo raised the threshold of how many people have to work on the vote on the Working Families Party line for it to continue to exist. So if 120,000 people do not vote on the Working Families Party line in this election, that will not exist, meaning that we will have, further, unification of the Democratic Party's interest. So it's really important that if you do vote for Biden, that you vote on the Democratic Party line. Whatever candidate you vote for, even if you have no choice and you don't like them, especially John Flynn, our DA, the more you vote on the Working Families Party line, the more you're making a statement that even if you're voting for somebody you don't necessarily like, you're voting under those Working Party family values, and you're giving the folks in the Working Families Party, which hopefully folks are willing to join, some leverage, some political mandate that says, hey man, yeah, Biden won, but half of his votes in New York State were working family. That means he's got to start to address those issues, or he knows that family in the future, Working Families Party, will be able to take his job away. So it's really important that when you look at your ballot, there are going to be elections where you'll see the same name on every single party line, And I'm definitely going to be voting on the Working Families Party line, because I want the people who are looking at this election to know that Working Families values are what people want and what people want to see out of their elections.
Black people in the